There's a very high correlation between milk consumption and divorce rate. Okay? The more you consume milk, the more likely are you to divorce your partner. So my advice is don't drink too much milk. Okay? Another question for you. How many of you like Will Smith, the actor? Anyone? No one? Okay. I think you, especially the ones that live in Kosovo, should start to like Will Smith much more. Okay? Because there is a very high correlation between Will Smith appearing in, once again, next slide please. Okay. So there's a very high correlation between Will Smith appearing in movies and energy generation in Kosovo. Okay? The more Will Smith appears in movies, there's a higher production or higher generation, because you're engineers, you know that energy is not produced. There's higher generation of energy in Kosovo. Okay? And one last question. Has any of you seen Money Heist or La Casa de Papel in Netflix? Okay? Did you ever think to rob a bank? No? I strongly recommend that you do that, because there's a high correlation between robbing banks and professor salaries, and I'm a lecturer myself, so my salary is likely to go up if you rob more banks. Okay? And it's a very, very high correlation. As you can see here, it's an R square of 85%. So 85% of variation in robbing banks is explained, in professor salaries is explained by robbing banks. But all of these examples that I gave you, are they really examples of, now you're going to have to switch, please. It's not working. Are these really examples of causation? Does really the appearance of Will Smith has anything to do with energy generation in Kosovo? Would you buy that story? I just told you that there is a very high correlation, right? But look at this picture here. Look at these beautiful birds here. Would you believe the story that this little bird here has bended the bar? No, but they like to stay in bars, right? It's just that these birds like to stand on these metal bars, and it happens that there is a bird here on the bar. It's not that the bird bended the bar. And that's the difference between correlation and causation. The bird did not cause this. It just happens to be that the bird likes to stay in these bars. And can we go to the next slide? So this is a classical example in statistics, which is my field of study, of the difference between correlation and causation. When it is very hot in the summer, if you stay too much outside in the summer without an umbrella, you're going to get your skin burned, right? We know that. So the sun burns your skin, okay? This is a cause. And we see that during the summer, the sunburn rate increases. At the same time, if you put ice cream exposed to the sun, or that is going to melt the ice cream, okay? But what happens during the sun is that because it's extremely hot, we like to eat ice cream more than during the winter. So the ice cream sales increase dramatically during the summer. So there is a high correlation between ice cream sales and sunburn rates. This is a correlation. But there is a causation between the sun burning our skin and the sun melting the ice cream, okay? So this is, once again, the difference between causality and correlation. And very often, these things are conflated. So they're mistakenly interpreted as the same thing. And this happens in general conversations. You're going to see this in the news, in the media, governments, people talking about different events and talking in a way as if these events were caused by them or by certain other events in the past. That's not the case. They can be highly correlated. And there is a degree of level of causality, or the ladder of causality, by Judea Pearl. Slide the other. So we start with association. This is the first level. Okay, this is the correlation level. So if you go back to the history of statistics, statistics started as a descriptive science, okay, for the purpose of governments. Now, what I told you in the very beginning was the associative level, okay? And the associative level, we just observe stuff. We observe the birds standing on those bars. And we ask the question, what is? How would seeing X change my belief in Y? But here, we would ask questions, for example, what does a symptom tell me about a disease? We're simply observing two relationships occurring and going in the same direction. A more advanced form of causality would be intervention, going up to the ladder here. This is the step 2 of the ladder. And in this case, we are doing something. We are intervening, and we are saying, what if? Okay? What if I take an aspirin? Will my headache be cured? Now something is happening here. We are intervening. And this is the first level of true causality. And the highest level of causality would be imagining counterfactual. Okay? Do we understand what counterfactual is? Counterfactual history is something that has not happened actually, but we can imagine if things had gone differently. What if Adolf Hitler won the Second World War? That would be a typical counterfactual historic question. Next slide. So in order to move from correlation to causality, what we do in statistics, and specifically my field of econometrics, we use the potential outcomes framework. This is the lingua franca of causal inference. And what this means is we consider two states of reality. One is the observed reality, what things really happen, and the other one is the counterfactual. Think of two parallel universes, okay? Let's say that hypothetically I can clone you guys, okay? We have two of you. And in one state, you have a headache, and I'm going to give you an aspirin, a pill, okay? And you're going to report the headache before taking the pill, and then you're going to report after you take the pill. In the other universe, your clone is not going to take a pill, okay? So you're going to report your level of headache before taking the pill and then afterwards. And the difference of the two is the causal effect. So the effect of taking a pill on your headache. But you are right if you're thinking, but what is he talking about? Counterfactuals. We don't observe counterfactuals, right? We don't see. This is a parallel universe, right? So we have to work with a high level of uncertainty, and we have some frameworks how to do that. So these are the methods that we use to estimate causal inference in statistics and econometrics. The gold standard is the randomized control trials, okay? So basically what I just explained to you, we have two groups. One group receives the treatment. These two groups have to be statistically similar to one another, okay? Because I cannot clone you, that was a hypothetical example, but we need to have two groups which are statistically not different from one another. So in two groups, one of the groups receives the treatment, the other group does not receive the treatment, and then you would estimate the difference between the two. There is an interesting series in Netflix, You Are What You Eat. Maybe some of you have seen You Are What You Eat. In You Are What You Eat, they do a randomized control trial. They work with clones, two identical twins. They give the diet to one of the twins, and they give a different diet to the other one, and then they measure the difference in their organism. That is a randomized control trial. But those are very costly, they take time, okay? And what we observe in those effects are really pertaining to specific realities. And in statistics, we want to have some generalizable results. So because we cannot do always that, we have other techniques and other methods which we use to estimate causal inference. And I'm going to show you only one of these techniques, given that I have a short amount of time to present today. This is called the difference in differences, okay? Once again, we have two groups. We have the treatment group, and we have the control group. The treatment group is the group that receives the treatment, that receives the pill. And what we do is we measure the two groups on some sort of an outcome before receiving the treatment. Then they receive the treatment, and then we measure the difference in outcome. So we see that the group that received the treatment has increased more. Now, I mentioned the counterfactual. Here, the counterfactual and the assumption is the assumption of parallel trends. In the absence of the treatment, the trends of the two groups would be very similar. They would move in parallel. So this is the unobserved counterfactual. And the difference between the unobserved counterfactual and the observed reality is what constitutes for a causal effect. So this is moving beyond correlation. Next slide. So why causality matters for AI? Most of the AI tools, and by AI I mean broadly speaking, because specifically you can think of the machine learning and LLMs, most of them rely heavily on correlations, and they are very useful when it comes to predicting stuff. So based on observations from the data from the past, we can extrapolate and forecast for the future. However, we are not able with these techniques to answer questions such as why or what if, and they cannot imagine counterfactuals. So we can observe what has happened in the past and then extrapolate and forecast for the future, but we're not really capable of answering questions such as why or what if. So moving from correlation to causation is really moving from a question of what it is to what it could be or why something is happening in a certain way. And this is very important because then causal AI would combine these statistical learning tools, that is correlation, with causal reasoning, and then we can discover true cause and effect mechanisms. We can simulate interventions and around many different counterfactuals, and then we can enable some sort of transparent reasoning rather to having these black boxes that we often face. Next slide. So what really happens, predictions are important, and I understand that they can be very important in many contexts, but we need to realize that high predictive power, especially given the big data that we have today, given that you can create some empirical models that can very precisely, estimate and fit these lines and estimate the relationships of two variables. Once you shift the data set and you assume that you have a good model and you try that on the other data, you see that it performs rather poorly. And this is one issue with these AI models and with big data. Given the amount of data, you can have very high predictive accuracy, but once you change the data set, you would see that you don't have a model that is really generalizable. And we want that. We want models that are generalizable because we don't observe the population, right? We work with samples and statistics, and from samples we want to infer something about the population. That is not to say that prediction is not important. For many companies, many businesses, they matter a lot. However, if we want to move one step forward and we want to understand the true cause and effect of interventions, then we would have to move to more advanced techniques. And the last slide, please. Now we would have to move from learning from correlations, this is predictive AI, to causal AI, which would be learning cause and effect mechanisms. And we would be able to move from answering questions such as what will happen to answering what if we intervene, what would be the effect if we put some sort of an intervention. We would move from optimizing prediction accuracy, as I showed earlier in the fitted line, to seeking explanations and understanding. And we would move from being confined to observed patterns, something that you can see and observe in the data, which is now the case, to exploring unseen counterfactual worlds, which is really in the realm of the potential outcomes framework. And moving from being powered by data and statistics, so this data-driven approach that we see with big data, to being powered by causal models and reasoning. And then we would move from forecasting to being able to estimate policy design and medical treatments, which can really help save lives at the end of the day. Next slide. That's all from me for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Interesting topic, interesting start with the correlation of data. So if anyone has any questions, now the time is yours. Okay, first one.
What is an observed failure of correlation when it comes to large scale? So obviously no one is going to buy the story of divorce and milk, but what is a real case example in policymaking in Kosovo, no, in general, where correlation has failed big time and has consequences, real, tangible consequences?
I think we can think of many examples in which you can see that correlations are misinterpreted as causal relationships, especially when it comes to policy, because these causal frameworks are really inspired by medical treatments. And doctors, and when they do these experiments, they can control for many parameters, they can control for many factors, but in social sciences, this is very hard to do. So whenever you hear somebody, for example, let's say when you hear a government official saying that, oh, we have increased, look at the exports, how much they have increased from one year to another, a good question would be to ask, what is the exact policy that the government did to increase the exports? Because simply by being in the government and observing that exports have increased does not mean that the government has done anything about increasing the exports. So you would always need to ask the question, what is the policy, what is the intervention? And what would be the counterfactual scenario in which, in the absence of the intervention, we would observe a different result? I think this partly answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Anyone? There's one more.
Hello, a very nice presentation. It's a pity that it was so short. I would be very interested to listen some more on the topic because some time ago I listened another presentation about fairness of these models, you know. And the person that was presenting, she gave an example of how in the US they applied a model, like the judges in US, to predict if someone would be a criminal, let's say, at some given time, and to predict their sentence. And what was noticed later is that this model was very biased, very race biased, very gender biased, it would be biased for the class or the economical status. And this is a failure, let's say. Is there any case of success, like a model where this was applied, a causal AI was applied, and it helped, it improved the model?
Yeah, absolutely. There are cases in which these techniques, which I showed today, have shown to be extremely successful. But one of the common criticisms of these techniques is that they suffer from external validity. For example, randomized control trial is something that you would do with small groups. One of the Nobel Prize winners in economics in 2019, Michael Kremer, he did some experiments in one of the African states with deworming pills. They gave some deworming pills, which are very cheap, and they saw that the well-being and the health of these pupils in these schools has dramatically increased. So they saw that such a very simple intervention could really help improve lives of many people. However, the question is, how many of these experiments are scalable? How many of them can be increased to sizes that really affect nations? With the potential of big data and AI, I think that we can do sort of things like this one. We can increase the scale of experience, so we can combine what we already have with leveraging all the data, and then combining using this data and these techniques. But please remember that data as such is useless, okay? If you process the data, you can derive some statistics. And then putting statistics into context, you obtain information, and connecting this information to systems, you produce knowledge. Just by gathering lots of data, that is useless. Okay? So I'm saying that I'm not going against AI or big data by any means. I'm saying combining these techniques with causal inference can help us move one step ahead. And causal AI is something that is being developed. It's not my new idea. It's something that you can observe in some recent books and papers that are going on around the world. So it's a quite contemporary topic, actually. But thank you for the question.
All right, I think that's it in terms of questions. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Use a shortcut here. So we'll continue with the agenda. Hopefully we'll have some interesting graphs and charts and correlations like this one. So next, I would like to invite to the stage Albert Konushevsky, who's going to talk about ThinkerQ, a new way how to handle complex tasks for backend engineers in backend applications that used to be something complex, but with ThinkerQ now this is much simpler. So if Albert is in the room. Yeah, I got the name right. Albert. He's still continuing the coffee break from 3 o'clock. Now we welcome Albert with a big applause on purpose. Woo! You did the VIP entrance. Proper VIP entrance. so Albert is taking his coat off, so be prepared. It's going to be a serious presentation. All right, good luck.
Thank you. En rast, een windje. Hey, pode ser do chão. Alles van vanaf de stad. Sorry guys, there is an issue with the slide. I try to do with AI. Okay, let's continue like this. So, yeah, my package is TiggerQ. For all of you that you don't know, it's a background job scheduler. So I started this project like 3 years ago while I was working in fintech mostly. So I've been working in the fintech, and the fintech is the most like profession when you need TiggerQ for background job scheduling. TiggerQ is a library which I've been working on it for 3 years. Oh, sorry. I have a bit of stress. I don't know. I'm gonna start again. It's my first time on the stage. So, thanks for all coming to this event. Yep. I need more hype. So my library is TiggerQ. I've been working for several years in the fintech. And the fintech is where you need mostly the background job scheduling. Because of the services, like lots of platforms right now, do the background job scheduling, there is several modern applications right now in the generation of AI, and the TiggerQ is trying to do the same thing. In the .NET, there are lots of background job schedulers, but none of them is like modern one. So I was with the idea why background jobs should be this hard, and why we don't have easy thing to schedule things in the background without having the barrier of complex stuff like working with XMLs, working with too many configurations on your application, and things like that. So I started thinking that this thing should change. And I saw that there is a chance because when Microsoft introduced with Azure Functions is pretty advanced thing in the .NET, and I see that that opportunity can be more like open source when we want to have one application in general, but we want to use it for free. And background job scheduling, so it's like complex application inside. So That's why I started to think and to build TickerQ. So my vision is in four core principles. Lots of schedulers doesn't have the precision or neither performance or predictability. I've been working with Hangfire. Hangfire is a scheduler which I'm not gonna say it doesn't have none of them because it's my competitor and I don't want to say bad words for that. But when it comes to precision, I've been using it and scheduling jobs in the background, like leaving a timer to run it for 1 minute. And after a few days, I saw that it's not running at that exact time because there is no precision. And the performance, because there is a downgrade, because when you have a lot of data set to run in the background, you will have issues like with memory. And if you're using like the old applications, old libraries like Hangfire, you will get struggling a lot because it's based on reflection. So the reflection is like the bottleneck of today's libraries because you scan for everything and you try to run like everything while building the application, which is pretty bad. So the predictability, so I just talk with that because you don't have, like, you cannot predict that that execution is going to run in that, like, exact time, which is scheduled for. And simplicity. So in the simplicity, I see, like, when I have to implement one library in the .NET or any other library, if it's not simple, so I just gave up because you have to maintain lots of things. And us as a creator, we should think like how to make it more simple because users will use it more. It's like pretty basic thing. So the problem that I solved to set up is because existing job scheduler like Hangfire have been for years in this area, but they came up as a bottleneck in this case. So pain points with existing solution is like slow startup and reflection of overhead. Because it is based on the reflection, like everything is gonna slow down your application, and when you run that application, it's gonna take like several seconds just to run it. So complex configuration, like Quartz has XML files, which is pretty hard to configure. You have like to have knowledge in the XML, you have to have knowledge in the .NET apps, you have like to do lots of work just to configure a scheduler. So it has also limited dependency injection and async support. Because right now in .NET, so I know that everything is moving to asynchron, everything is moving like in the performance way, everything is getting better, but the old libraries doesn't support it. And unpredictable performance because you have like to manage everything and sometimes you just get like memory leaks